Hello, everyone. Welcome to another podcast of Heaven's Heart. And this is based on Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 21, where God says, hey, if you put me first, put my word first in your home, your family, your relationships, you can experience days of heaven on the earth. And so that's Heaven's Heart. That's our heart. And that's what these podcasts are designed to help you experience heaven on earth. And so we've been talking to singles. We've been looking at preparing yourself naturally, spiritually, being led to the Spirit, allowing God to orchestrate your meeting together. We use the scriptural illustration about Isaac and Rebekah. Isaac wasn't going to the local clubs looking for a gal. Rebecca wasn't, posting online, availability and so forth. They were faithful in what they were doing. They trusted God, and God brought them together. And that's the most beautiful thing, most wonderful thing. Now, I'm not saying God can't use other means and methods like dating apps, but the most important thing is be led. And the thing is, God wants to write your story. Jesus wants to be the author and the finisher, not only of your faith, but of your meeting and your marriage. He wants to author it. He wants to design your meeting. He wants to bring you together. He wants to make your story beautiful. And the more you allow him and put him to serve it, the more beautiful it'll be. And he wants to write a story for you, just like he wrote a story for Nancy and I. And folks have been asking, we tell it from time to time about our meeting. And so I'm going to go first. And of course, I went to Bible school and I was in full-time ministry, by the time I was 21 years old, actually 20 years old. And, I want to get married. So I read books, I studied books and so forth. And throughout the years, I was faithful. At times it seemed like I wasn't going to get married, because there'd be prospects and God would say, no, that's not the one, and so forth. And I was getting to be in my upper 20s, and it was looking like, hey, I may never get married, but I know that God has a plan. And I would never want to jeopardize his plan over being impatient or wanting to get a temporary fix before the real thing came. But what happened concerning our story, at least from my viewpoint here, I was faithful in church and ministry. And I remember the first time that my wife back then, Nancy Johnston, walked into the church building. I was an associate pastor at the time. And of course, immediately, the first thing struck out to me, I found her to be very, very attractive. And like we said before, and we'll say it again, you need to be attracted to the person that would be your potential spouse, but that ought not to be the only premise. The first thing is spiritually, what God is joining together. You wanted a God joining, not a flesh joining or a human will joining. And so I saw her, and I saw she was attractive, but that didn't make me want to act on it, because there's many beautiful people in the world, and the book of Proverbs, beauty is vain, but a woman that fears the Lord shall be praised. And so I just took note of her, that she was attractive, but then she began to serve in the church and get involved in church. And I tell you, that made her very attractive to me. Now she's on my radar. You remember how Rebecca, how God knew, Abraham's servant knew that she was the one when she served Abraham's servant, not only him water, but drew out water for the camels, a servant's heart. And that's what you want in a spouse, is a servant's heart. That's a heart that loves the Lord. So she began to serve. So, I was naturally attracted, and I noticed she had good church habits, going to church, and she was serving. And all these things are making her more and more attractive. But even at that point, I didn't dare just to go out on, I like the way she looks, I like the way she serves. I wanted to hear what heaven said. So what I did is, when I saw her and says, hey, wow, I really like her, that this is my story. I'm not saying you have to. Your story will be different, but the principle ought to be the same. that I took time to pray. And what I did for about 4 months. Now, the reason why it took 4 months, because up to that time I didn't get an answer. And honestly, sometimes I'd take an hour a day, maybe sometimes 2 hours. And I would just focus on the Lord. I'd pray in the Spirit and say, Lord, what do you think of her? I would just talk to the Lord. I had other duties and other things I prayed about in meditation, but I would just focus it and bring it before the Lord. I was honoring her. I was honoring the Lord with her. I didn't want to step out in the flesh on a natural attraction. So I prayed. And, the first month went by. And so I just continued because I wanted to know. And too many times we cut ourselves short because we don't pray long enough to hear. The goal of praying is to hear, not to say, well, I prayed, that's it, and so it must be God. No, to hear from heaven. So I didn't get an answer the first month. And then the second month came. And praying, and I continued to do. I didn't, and she could tell you in her own story that I more or less ignored her. I didn't want to bring anything out in the flesh. I was actually kind of cold to her because I didn't want her to be attracted to me unless I heard from heaven. Was I going to send signals out? And so the third month went by. And so it was in the fourth month. And all this time, she was getting more involved. And I was spying on her, looking at her and says, man, is she the one? And so forth. Then I remember being in prayer that I said, Lord, I prayed 4 months. I've honored you. I don't want to move. And Lord, and I know if I haven't heard anything from you now, I understand the law of the inward witness. And the law of the inward witness is this, that sometimes you have to take a step in order to know the will of God. Like God will lead by stop signs. And so here I prayed. God didn't speak to me. So I said, Lord, I'm going to ask her out. Now, Father, I'm going to trust you if I'm not to do this, that you'll check me in my spirit. But I had peace in my spirit. And so I knew it was God. And let me say this, that I've had people say, well, I had peace about asking her or asking him. Well, you need to find that. Did you pray? Did you get in a place that was beyond your soul? A lot of times people's peace is in their soul. They feel good in their emotions, and they think that's God.
Right.
God is, he'll bear witness with your spirit. That same spirit that corrects you will direct you.
Yeah.
And so I listened to here. And here I prayed 4 months, hours and hours, and he didn't show me things. He didn't give me dream, vision, no audible voices, no nothing. And then I knew that as many as are led by the Spirit of God are the sons of God. The number one way that God is going to lead us is by the inward witness. So I looked on the inside, and when I said I'm going to ask her, I checked on the inside. Then I remember in one service, I asked her out. All that time I was looking on the inside if she would like to go out to dinner sometime. And I had no check. I had peace about it. And so we went out on a date. And so from that time, now notice what we did here is I just didn't date because I saw her as attractive. I didn't date because I saw she served in church. I prayed and I waited to hear from heaven, and heaven, I had peace in my spirit, and then I dated to find out more about her. And from that time, get to know her. And so that's kind of my story. Now ours is a bit supernatural.
Yeah.
The thing is, it wasn't so much happening on my end, but the supernatural happened her end, because I was, of course, in ministry 10 years. I was more mature, and God wants us, number one way, to be led by the inward witness. And so God expected me to be a big boy and listen on the inside, not look for anything spectacular, and to be just as firm that I heard from heaven from the inward witness than I would from a vision. And so that's kind of my aspect. And of course, 30 years later, here we are. But I'm going to turn it over from Nancy. Now, her side's a little different, a lot more exciting than my side.
True. Very true. So our stories are very different. But on the last podcast, I had talked about how I was in school, had mentioned that I was in college. Here he was already 6 or 7 years already as serving as an associate pastor, went to Bible school. And I'm a student at Fredonia, and had just really just recently rededicated my life to the Lord, and really rededicated, reconsecrated my life, and began to pursue God, and grabbed a hold of a couple of scriptures. I just began to do what it said right there in Psalm 37:4. I just began to delight myself in the Lord, because He said, if you delight yourself in the Lord, He'll give you the desires of your heart. And so I'm focusing on the Lord and focusing on my studies and spending a lot of time in prayer along with my studies, praying a lot and telling the Lord what kind of man I was looking for, letting my request be made known, and telling Him everything that I was looking for in a spouse. And the interesting thing is, I said, Lord, I want a man who has good business sense, a man that loves God more than me, a man that will can speak into my life and bring me up higher in God. And I said, but Lord, I want a man that will serve you all the days of his life. But I want you to know this, Father. I said, I don't want to marry a pastor. And so apparently God didn't pay much attention to that request. And I will continue to add more to that. God didn't have an issue with that. But I had said, Lord, I just don't want to marry a pastor. I knew what that would mean. And I didn't want everything attached to what that would mean. And so I continued to pray. And one day my mother calls me. And like I had said before in the last podcast, I said, Lord, I just got to have the handwriting on the wall. I want to know beyond the shadow of a doubt that when I see this man, that I'd lock eyes with this man, that I'm going to know he's my husband. I just wanted that surety. Well, my mother calls me one day. I'm living off-campus housing, my senior year of college. And she says to me, and she had met my husband, who was serving as an associate pastor in our church. She had come to visit. She met him, and that was it. She met him one time. Later, she has a dream. She calls me. She said, Nancy, I know you're going to think this is strange, but I had a dream last night. And I had the same dream 3 times. Now, you know that's unusual, because a lot of times you'll have a dream if you wake up from a dream and you go back to sleep. You don't have the same dream 3 times. It happened 3 times, the same dream. She has a dream, she wakes up, she goes to sleep, she has the same dream, wakes up, 3 times this happened. And she said, I had to tell you this because I believe it's God. But what I saw in my dream is I saw you walking down the aisle of your church, and I saw you from the backside, and you were getting married to that associate pastor in your church. And I said, really? Okay, well, all right. That's nice, Mom. And we hung up, and I began to ponder that. And I said, well, that's interesting. I'm not attracted to him physically at all. I certainly respect him, but as my associate, but I'm not, there's no attraction, but I just kind of put it on the back burner of my mind and didn't think much of it and continued on with my studies. And then one night I have a dream. And in my dream, I dreamt that it was on a Wednesday night service. And back then we were having, I think it was Wednesday evening. We had our midweek was Wednesday night services. And I had a dream that my husband, Pastor Michael, he took me to this certain location in the back of our church by the window. I remember exactly where it was, the back of the church on the right side as you're coming into the church. And he said to me in this dream, Nancy, I'd like to know if you would like to have dinner with me sometime. And I woke up from the dream. And I said, okay. When I woke up, I thought, well, that's interesting. I'm not attracted to him at all. And I know I didn't eat a heavy meal before I went to bed. And, we don't put a lot of emphasis on dreams. Not every dream comes from the Lord. But how do you know it's God? One of the indicators that it's God is if you wake up immediately after the dream. And number 2, you'll have peace after the dream. And so I had both. But my mind was running, and I thought, well, I'm not physically attracted to him, but yet at the same time, my mother had told me that she had a dream of myself getting married to Michael, and then I had this dream. So I'm pondering it, and I thought, well, that's interesting, but I had a knowing even though my mind had trouble with it because there was no physical attraction, in my spirit, I had a knowing that if we were ever meant to be together as a married couple, I knew in my spirit that our dream would become a reality, that my dream would actually happen. I just knew it in my spirit. I continued to go about my studies. Sure enough, on a Wednesday night service, I'm sitting there next to an older lady who's no longer, she moved away a long time ago. I didn't even know her name. My husband is stepping up to the pulpit to speak. And as he's stepping up to the pulpit to speak that night on a Wednesday night, this elderly lady turned to me and said, "You know, Nancy," and here I'm a college student. She goes, "I pray for Pastor Michael all the time." And I said, "Great. Well, that's wonderful that you pray for him. Good. That's great." She said, "But you know what? Every time I pray for him, I see your face." Okay, let's pause for a minute. Okay, first we have my mother, who has the same dream 3 times and said, "I believe it's God. I know you think it's strange, but I believe it's God." Then we have the dream that I have. And then now we have this lady who says to me, every time she prays, she sees my face. So I went to the Lord and said, "Lord, we need to talk because there's some funny things going on here. There's funny things going on. First of all, there's these 3 happenings." I said, "Lord, my mind is going crazy and I cannot make sense of it all. It doesn't make any sense to me. And anyway, I told you I did not want to marry a pastor. And he's an associate pastor. So now that really is adding to the confusion and the..."
Don't forget about Pastor Connie, too.
Yes.
Yeah, that one.
Let me add this because
Yes.
I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yes.
Because I said I was living in this off-campus housing, the same place that living in the place when my mother called that this is the location I was living at. So I get a dream. I'm talking to the senior pastor's wife of the church that my husband was working as an associate pastor. The senior pastor's wife called me one day, and we were very close. So we're having a conversation with one another, and somehow in the conversation, and it had nothing to do with the subject matter of what we were talking about. But suddenly, I just happened to mention her to her. I said, "I don't know." We talked about a little bit about marriage. And I said, "Pastor Connie," I said, "I don't know that I'll ever have children in the future. I probably not." And she said, "Well, Nancy, Pastor Michael wants a lot of children." And I said, I thought that was strange because what does he have to do with the conversation, right? And so I got home, and that's when I said, "Lord, all this stuff happening. My mind can't make sense of it. What did he have to do with the conversation?" And when I questioned her about it later in the week, I said, "Pastor Connie, can I talk to you for a minute?" I said, "You said to me on the phone like a few days ago that you said, Pastor Michael wants a lot of children." I said, "Do you remember saying that to me?" She said, "I did." I said that? No, I don't remember. I don't remember saying that. She said, it must have been by the Spirit. And I said, okay, this is when I went to the Lord. And then I remembered that I had said to the Lord, "Lord, I'm a baby Christian. I've got to have the handwriting on the wall." And I had all these supernatural, between me praying, myself praying, and my husband praying, I'm getting all these supernatural things. I was having confirmation after confirmation after confirmation. And I said, "Lord, okay, it seems to me, my mind can't make sense of any of this. And I told you I didn't want a pastor anyway. My mind can't make sense of it. But if this is you, and I told you I didn't want to marry a pastor, then I trust you because I said, you're the best matchmaker in the world. And I completely put my confidence and trust in you that if I'm to marry a pastor, then the grace and the equipment will be there." And that's where I left it. That's where I left it. And so sometimes we think we know what's right for us, but God knows better. This is the wonderful thing about putting your trust in him, because he knows who's right for you.
Yeah.
I'm not done yet. But,
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so sure enough, a Wednesday night comes, a Wednesday night service, just like in my dream. It was a Wednesday night service. And at the end of the service, he takes me to the same back right-hand side, back corner by the window of the church, exactly like in my dream, and said, he made a joke. He cracked a joke nervously. He might refute that, but he was nervously cracking a joke. And then said, and I was wanting to know if you would like to have dinner with me sometime. Just exactly like in my dream. And I had said before that I had a knowing in my heart that if we were ever meant to be together, the dream would become a reality. And sure enough, when he said that to me, I knew that was my husband. But before this moment when he actually asked me out officially, when I saw all these things going on, the dream, the confirmations, I was standing and I was ushering and greeting at the door, and I saw my husband, who was then the associate pastor, talking to the senior pastor. And I looked over at him while he was talking, and there's no attraction for him at all. And I'm thinking, so I said to myself, Lord, I'm beginning to sense he's the one, because there's just too many things going on, all these confirmations after confirmation. But we have a problem, Father. I'm not attracted to him. You can't, before I say that, let me say this. I told him, Lord, I'm not attracted to him. So yeah, you better drop some love in me real quick, because that's an important element. There's got to be an attraction before you marry someone, and attraction helps. Just saying. Time goes on. There should be an attraction there. There was no attraction there. Instantly, when I looked at him and I said that, all of a sudden, like someone would come up and put a coat over you, love dropped into my heart. And I looked at him, I was in love. Now, you can't make yourself love somebody like that. You can't make yourself just suddenly be attracted to someone like that. It was supernatural how it happened. It was all God. And I like to say that, I say it this way, and it was an arranged marriage. Yeah. I had nothing to do with it. It was all God.
Amen.
Yeah.
Well, our time has slipped away, but again, we wanted to tell our story.
Yeah.
How God orchestrated it. Your story will be different, but if you'll trust God and allow God to do it, you'll write your own story. And there's some interesting things here that she was in my life, in our scope here, and she initially was not attracted to me, then God put it on her heart. And sometimes there may be people in your own church that you just kind of discounted, but if you open your heart to the Lord may say, that is the person for you. And just allow God to be the author and the finisher. And that way you write your own story, and you know that what God has brought together, no man could put asunder. Hey, we trust it's been a help and blessing to you. Until next time, this has been Heaven's Heart, how to have heaven in your relationships.
Yes.